Welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Not Your Average Investor Show. Today we are talking about 3 ROI maximizing innovations by JWB in 2021 with superstar property manager Melissa Gillispie. Right now I've got something to report, and it's that we are live on Facebook for the Tuesday edition of the Not Your Average Investor Show. I am your host, Pablo Gonzalez, my co-host, the man that they call GC because of his genius concepts, because he generates cash flows, because he's a great co-host, and also coincidentally because his name is Greg Cohen. Say hello, Greg.
Hello, everybody. Great to be with you. Thank you for being here.
And returning for the second time to the show, the leader of the property management department, an all-star athlete in her own right, to explain to you about the 3 ROI maximizing innovations by JWB in 2021. Welcome, Melissa Gillispie. Welcome, Melissa. Good to have you back.
Hey, thanks, y'all. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me back.
It is great to have you. You know, originally Greg wasn't going to be here for this call, but he saw how good you were at the last show that he was really worried that he was going to lose his job. So it's
right.
Or you were worried about what I was going to say because it didn't go that well. I don't know which one, but it's okay. Either way, it's fine.
I'm gonna go with the former. But welcome to our friends that are all here. We already got 63 people on the call. This is awesome. We got Lee Bishop is back. Welcome, Lee. Welcome. Oh, happy birthday, Lee. Welcome, Bill Shields. Welcome, Marilyn. Welcome, Jennifer. Welcome, Leo. Welcome, Margaret. I love this. This is our communities in the house. John Henning, welcome back. Eddie Harris from Hotlanta. Welcome back, Eddie. Nadeem, welcome back. Let me see if I'm going to run out of names to say before I run out of breath. Sheila Bishop is back for a third or fourth time. Welcome back, Sheila. You're officially a regular. It's great to have you. And as you all know, right? I see a lot of pros in here in the chat. You are chatting with me already, and we encourage it. The one trick is to, when you first default into the chat, it's defaulted to speak to only the panelists. If you could just drop down that blue box and hit panelists and attendees, now you're talking to everybody else. Welcome back, Robert Perusina from California, a lovely part of the world that I'm a big fan of. So make sure, Stevie B in the house. Welcome, Stevie B. So if you're chatting in that chat, make sure that you drop that drop-down menu. And second is that if you want the question asked on air, you want me to ask Melissa a question, you want me to ask old GC over here a question, please use the Q&A box, because as you will see, this chat flies, right? And that's, I am not perfect. I tend to lose track of things, but if you put it in the Q&A box, I always point this way because that's where it is on my screen. I know that doesn't make sense to anybody else, but if you put it in the Q&A, it gets stuck there right in front of my face. I can't miss it. And we're going to get the question asked live on air. You may make it to the micro content. You're going to make it on the podcast. You're going to be JWB, Not Your Average Investor Show famous. And last but not least, if you want the ROI tool that JWB uses in all their deals, the one that we mess around with on Thursdays with the property, with the POT dubs, go to jwbroi.com, download yourself that sheet, and have fun. I know I do every Thursday with it. So without further ado, before we really bring on the star of the show, Greg, it's your turn. I'm sorry, man. I couldn't help myself. I think we talked about it in the invite for the show, right? Like we're going to talk about these 3 ROI maximizing innovations, but why it's important is equally as important, right? Like, and there is these home price and interest rate increases that are going to have a negative effect on future cash flows, and JWB is taking proactive action. Can you give us a little bit of history on what's going on in the market? Let's bring everybody up to speed here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so thank you to everybody for being here. Just such an outpouring of support from clients. I see a lot of clients on the call. And also new faces and regulars. Thank you all for being here. I just think this is a really timely topic. I'm so thankful that we have Melissa here as well to give a lot of credence and a lot of experience and a lot of kind of strategy, because when we're talking about where turnkey rental property investing is as an asset class, a lot of things are going to change in the coming years. If you think about what we were talking about on Thursday of last week, we spent some time answering questions from all of you about what happens when interest rates go up. What happens when purchase prices continue to go up as home values appreciate? What happens when property taxes go up because your home values go up? All of these things, what happens? And we actually broke it down on an evaluation to show that what's very real in all of our minds, and if you go across the rental property investing space, is that cash flows today are better than they are going to be 1 year from now, 2 years from now. It's never been more clear to me and to my colleagues that we're at a time where home prices are going to go up in future years because there's such limited supply, and interest rates are going to go up because they cannot be any lower than they are today. They are artificially low. And even last Thursday, we were talking about some news that just came out as far as what Fannie Mae is buying as far as the loans that they purchase. And not to get too detail oriented on what all that means, but at the end of the day, this is a sign that interest rates and terms for rental property loans are going up. They are already starting to go up, and you're going to see this happen more and more. And so when that happens, it is the role of your asset manager, call it property manager, asset manager, whatever that role is for you. JWB, of course, provides that role for our clients. Whoever that is for you, if it's yourself, it's your property manager, whoever, you need to be thinking about ways to preserve your cash flow, right? Because it's not like we're just going to throw our hands up in the air and say, well, interest rates are going up and home prices are going up. I guess there's no cash flow to be had, or I guess, we can't preserve it, right? We have leaders on our team that have been thinking about this literally years in advance and putting initiatives in place in advance to preserve the cash flows, to be able to protect the cash flows as much as we can. And that's why I'm so excited, because these things are not just a luxury. As you go forward in this space over the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, this is going to be a requirement. Because if your team is not thinking about this and doing some of the things that we're going to show you here on the call today, you're not going to be able to invest in cash flow positive properties, right? The dynamics of this asset class are really changing, and it's never been a more important message than right now. And so I'm super excited to have Melissa here to kind of walk us through that path.
Me too, man. I'm also super excited to talk about how y'all came up with all these ideas, but spoiler alert, we're going to save that till the end because I think it's a really, really cool story. So stick around. We got 80 people on the call right now. This is amazing. Welcome everybody. Love having the Not Your Average Investor Show community here. And let's get right to it, man. Let's start with the exciting stuff, right? Like there's some stuff that is expense reduction that's going to increase ROI very like tangibly, and there's some other like risk mitigation stuff that just makes the asset class more interesting. Let's go right into like the coolest stuff about it. Melissa, you want to tell us about the number one initiative, the Septic systems? I just have it as a deal here. Can you explain why we're going to get excited about Septic?
Yeah, I know, right? Never thought you'd be talking about this and being excited. So this is just such a cool program that Jim Marshall, who's our director of construction, really spearheaded leading into this year. Spent a lot of time on the tail end of 2020 putting this together. And the way that it works is basically we took the relationship we have with our septic vendor, who is a trusted vendor. We've worked with him for many years. And we said, how can we capitalize on this relationship to make it mutually beneficial, really to allow him to thrive and perform better for us, as well as allow us to perform, of course, better for our clients when it comes to maintenance expenses that you would be seeing on a monthly basis, annual basis. And so basically what happened is we said, okay, we have about 9% of our portfolio of homes that we manage that are on septic systems. So it's not a huge majority, but certainly enough to pack a big punch when you're talking about maintenance expense. And when you look at overall expenses historically, it's about 9% of that overall maintenance expense as we've tracked it by trade over time. And so, when we look at that, that's a pretty big number, the dollar amount. When you really look at dollars and cents and the impact to the client, it's really significant. And so we were trying to think of ways to make this experience better for the resident, the cost lower for the client, and the experience for the vendor a little bit more positive as well. So we came up with a program where basically a home that is on septic gets enrolled in this program by the vendor doing inspection to make sure that the system is working properly and that our vendor feels comfortable backing it, kind of like a warranty service. And then in order for this to make sense for him, obviously he's got to get paid. He can't do work for free. And so what we're doing is we are layering in an additional expense to the resident on the front end of their lease agreement, to where they will be charged just like they would for sewer or water with the city, right? Just like I pay my JEA bill and I have a city water and sewer bill. If you're on septic, traditionally you don't have that sewer portion of that bill. And so typically you're just saving on that utility expense. we're just lumping in a utility expense to that resident when they're signing their lease in order to properly maintain that system and keep it working for them as well while they're living and renting it in that home. And so what that does is the resident is paying that cost gets passed to the vendor as basically the vendor's profit center, right? And then they handle all repairs using those funds that we're collecting for them. And so what does that do? It means that there isn't a septic bill coming through for a $650 repair to you, to the client. That means if we have to replace a septic system, it largely covers most ways and reasons that something would need to be replaced. And so instead of passing along those large expenses to the client, the vendor is absorbing them, utilizing these funds that have been paid over time by the resident. So it's kind of like an insurance policy, a warranty policy of sorts is probably the best way to explain it, but it really protects the client. Is the main reason we're doing this is we're trying to limit or reduce septic expenses that you would see on your property. So it's super innovative. Obviously, this is a new program. We've just rolled it out. We have about 20 homes eligible for it today. We're only rolling it out when the home is hitting the rental market. So where your home might be occupied with a lease in place, we aren't going to that resident at this point in time and saying, hey, I know you haven't ever had to pay this additional fee before, but now you have to. We're waiting until the property turns and we have it back on the market so that it's kind of a fresh start for everyone. Felt like that really was the best way to make that something that a resident could really believe in and see as a positive, while obviously still trying to focus on the decrease of the expense. And so as it works and as we see this really come full circle and we see those expenses reduce, we'll continue to roll it out to more and more homes with the intention to be able to roll it out across all homes on septic and really see that impact to you as the client in the future with those expenses. So it's really interesting, super innovative. I didn't think of it. I just get to share with you today, but it's really impressive.
That's kind of like my entire role in this business. I didn't think of it, but I get to share it with you today. But this one, it really, I think is gonna move the needle, especially more in future years. So let's kind of take a few steps back, right? If we know that the backdrop here is that inventory is extremely scarce today, and that it's only getting harder and harder for turnkey rental property companies to be able to provide inventory. If we start looking at the biggest ticket items for maintenance costs and start to come up with innovative solutions, we in theory can drop those maintenance expenses. And if we in theory can do that, what that allows us to do is to have more opportunities to create inventory. Because right now, the way it works, our septic costs on our property evaluations for you as an owner of rental properties, we expect you to have more maintenance costs because you're on septic, you have a septic system, than if you were on a city sewer. And so if you back all that back down the line, JWB has to acquire the property for much lower to be able to sell it to you and produce positive cash flow. So if we can attack these big ticket items like Melissa is talking about, ultimately, this allows us one way that we can extend the runway, which is one huge win. And then, right? I mean, Melissa, what does it typically cost to repair a septic system? Maybe $7,000, maybe $10,000?
If you're looking at replacement, yes, you're in the high thousands. You're looking at 7, 10. I've seen some for up to $12,000. It's all dependent, obviously, on the size of the yard and things like that. The lowest cost is in the 300s, 400s. So it's not cheap to maintain, and being able to really mitigate those costs and keep them from hitting a client at the end of the day is going to be a huge way that we impact, like what you're saying, the ability to have a purchase for a client make sense, to where the returns make sense, and we're able to still perform in a positive way, even with the changes you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, there's a huge win for clients long term. I mean, I'm going to go through the multiple wins across here, right? This is going to allow JWB to pay more for a property on septic, which gives us a better chance to be able to create that inventory and provide it for clients in the future. This is one of dozens of ways that we are coming up with solutions to that problem. And then if you're talking about the biggest part of that septic expense. I mean, I would assume if you have maybe a $7,000 to $10,000 expense if septic tanks go out of those expenses, if you can mitigate that, right? If you can decrease the chances of an owner feeling that has the biggest opportunity to move the needle and potentially decreasing septic costs, right?
Absolutely. You know, if we took a bucket of expense like handyman work, where those costs are so small, they add up certainly, but on a large scale to actually move the needle in a significant way, you have to look at some of these high ticket items that really hurt when they happen. They hit that bottom line hard, and they can wipe you out for much more than just a couple months of return or cash flow, right? They're significant when they happen. So if you can prevent them from happening, you'll see that play out.
Yeah. And then just the final thing, when you and Adam and the team rolled this out to us, I was looking at this and I'm like, man, if I'm an owner, because I am an owner of rental properties, this sounds great. This is kind of like insurance, and, you know, it prevents me from having that, you know, big cash hit, you know, that's worth it to me to pay for that. That's actually what I was thinking as you guys are rolling this out. And, you know, the other thing I love about it is now the goals are aligned between the septic provider and JWB and the resident, right? Because the septic provider has an incentive to make sure that the system is performing. So I loved all these things. But then you guys shared that this is also a win for the resident, right? And this is an expense that is going to go on the resident, but it's nothing different than what they would be paying if they had been attached to city sewer, right? And I never really put those pieces of the puzzle together, how this could still fit in line with what a normal expense situation would be for a resident, but this is not an expense to owners as we start to roll this out more and more. I just think that really is a home run across the board.
Absolutely.
I'm hearing vertical integration with the septic provider is what I'm hearing, Greg.
You know it, brother. Yeah.
And a lot of this is a hit. This is a hit in the chat, right? Stevie B says he loves that. It's so logical. Robert Persuina says, excellent innovation, guys. And we got a couple of questions here. So Gerard Wendling asks, what about lease renewals?
Yep, great call. So we initially in the rollout have focused strictly on new leases that we'd be signing with our leasing team, but it's absolutely part of our plan to, when these homes are coming up for renewal in the future, we'd be laying out this program, renewing the lease with this intention in mind, capturing that fee, and then allowing us to kind of more quickly turn properties onto this program. And I think that's the piece, right? You can look at time to implementation. And if we waited for every lease to end so that we could start the program, that's going to take quite some time. But if we can start integrating it on the renewal side, it'll be quicker. So that is the intention. We're starting slow. Obviously, whenever you roll something out like this, there are also a lot of operational changes that have to happen with how you set up charges and how you communicate to residents long-term and all of these different little pieces. So our team has been working to tweak those processes and make sure that from an operational standpoint, we aren't messing things up, right? There's this piece of like, it'd be really great until it's not good and we did something wrong. So we have to make sure that piece is right, but absolutely good call on the renewal component. We certainly intend to do that.
Nice. Yvonne Jones puts in the chat, great system, Melissa. Love it. All right. Tanya Conway has a question. Any thought towards creating a similar program for those rental properties that are in a HOA, having their tenant pay an HOA utility fee?
It's so interesting you ask that, because there have been a couple of different programs and ideas like this that we're exploring where we'd tack on an additional cost to the resident and work through decreasing expenses in that way. The challenging part is if you think about it from the prospect or the resident standpoint, you're looking at market rent, right? And we have to keep up with market rent for you. And the more fees and add-ons we add on to that resident on the front end, the more challenging it becomes for someone to be able to afford the market rent we need to perform for you, as well as all of the add-ons. So we have to be very strategic and mindful about what programs make the most sense in order to not have so many add-ons on the front to where we can't keep up with market rent in the future, really, for you. We've been talking a lot about renewal increases and how we're approaching those from a market appreciation standpoint, because so much has changed. And looking at what is our wiggle room now within that market rent really range based on comparables and all of that. And so we're having to think through carefully how we utilize any gap that we have to be sure that we're not setting ourselves up to not perform for you in the future if we're not able to capture a market increase because a resident can't afford to do that. So it's a really good idea, and it's certainly one that, you know, we're considering lots of different things like this. It's just making sure that the decision is very strategic so that we continue to do what's right for y'all and not end up in a tougher spot down the line. I don't know if you want to add to that, Greg, but
I've just seen the rent renewal increases that you guys get day in and day out, and they're substantial. So you know, that's the main focus, making sure that we can hit market rent. All these other things are great to consider, but we can't, you know, what do they say? Cut off your nose to spite your face. I think I finally nailed one of these cliches.
maybe. I don't know. I'm the wrong person to ask.
Where's Adam Eisen when you need him? He's my business partner that just messes up every cliche. So no, great idea. There's a number of them, and just, you know, the main thing that we got to hold ourselves accountable to is market rent.
Absolutely.
You know, this brings up, Joseph Albano asked in the Q&A, how significant is this rent increase to the resident?
It's minimal. So there's different types of septic systems. So without getting into too much like nitty gritty detail about the different types and how differently they operate and how, you know, sensitive and parts costs and all of those things are different based on the type of system. So it's roughly $50 to $60 for the resident to have included as part of their, you know, front costs and then monthly costs and expenses. So it's maybe a little bit higher than what you'd see as a typical sewer charge, but not significantly, which feels like it falls right in line with what they'd be paying if they were on just city sewer.
And that's why it works well for new residents coming on board, because you sit down, you set expectations, you of course qualify that resident to make sure that they can afford it and they're prepared for it. So it helps on the new ones for sure.
Absolutely.
Set expectations, another common theme in old JWB walls. So we got to set expectations here. We got a bunch of really great questions about septic, but we want to get to everything else because you're going to have a bunch of great questions about everything else. We don't want to run out of them. So let's move on to the next one, and then we'll come back to some of these questions and we'll kind of pick and choose here. So let's talk about the flex deposit, Melissa. Tell me about that.
It is a really cool program that we found. Actually, a couple of other property management companies locally and not locally, nationally, have found that you can offer deposit alternatives to your prospects on the front end. And so that's what this program is. It's a traditional deposit alternative. So instead of a resident paying a traditional 1 month's rent deposit, we're able to capture 2.5, 3 times that deposit amount in the form of a bond that the resident qualifies for. And what happens is the resident pays a lot less upfront as a non-refundable fee, but the client has coverage at the lease end for the 2.5 to 3 times what our traditional deposit amount would be. So in the example of $1,000 traditional deposit, you have a resident on the front end who can qualify for a bond of $2,500. And if they qualify with their credit, they only have to pay maybe 10% of that $2,500 as a non-refundable fee. So they're placing $250 down up front to have coverage for the client of $2,500, where traditionally, if it's $1,000 deposit, the resident would be paying $1,000 up front. And so the buy-in for the prospect on the front end is really being able to move in more quickly with less money up front. And when you're moving, think about it. I mean, any of us can attest to, if you've moved, renting or buying or whatever, it's very expensive. There are so many different costs associated. And so if we can provide a solution for a prospect to put less money up front, but also provide way more coverage for our client at the lease end. Greg and I were talking about this earlier. And really, if you look at our property turn expense to a client at the end of a lease, $2,500 is what a client's probably set to expect when they have a resident that moves out. If we have $1,000 deposit that is or is not guaranteed to be forfeited back to the client, because a traditional deposit is the resident's money and we have to, handle those funds very carefully. With this bond, that $2,500, we file a claim with the bond company and they reimburse us for that expense. And so there's more of an upside to collect much more at lease end to really reduce or potentially remove altogether that property turn expense that you'd be used to having to pay some portion of. And so it can really mitigate those expenses on the back end. Obviously, Greg's laughing, and he's probably laughing because I tread lightly here. I like to under promise and over deliver. That's one of our core values. And this is new. Of course, the bond company we're working with is one that has been in business and is very trusted in this space. But of course, it's a claim you file, and that claim has to be paid out, right? And so until we see that play out consistently, I'm hopeful and cautiously optimistic about, but I do obviously want to taper the excitement a little, but it is potentially a really big win for the client for sure.
This has been one of these problems that I've just hoped and dreamed and wished that we could solve for many years now, because, in working with clients, we understand that the biggest pain point is maintenance costs and vacancy costs. And if we even drill down a little bit more, out of just maintenance costs, the biggest pain point is your property turn, because that's where potentially you have to come out of pocket a couple $1,000s, a few $1,000s, and nobody likes that, right? But that's how rental property investing works, right? The residents in the home, generally speaking, we're doing better than expected because we have lower maintenance and lower vacancy costs when they're in the home. And then when they leave, you have a bigger maintenance cost. You have a bigger, vacancy cost. So, but we didn't want that. Like, I have wanted to come up with a way to where there wasn't such a big punch to the gut when people leave. And when I heard about this program, this flex deposit program, that's what just spoke to me. I'm like, wow, now this experience as an owner of rental properties, we potentially have the opportunity to really minimize the biggest pain point that you will feel. And
Absolutely.
And that is just absolutely, that can and should and will be a game changer. Now, at the same time, Melissa's right. This is the first time we're rolling this out. And I can guarantee you there are going to be things that didn't exactly go according to plan. Part of the reason we do this show is to be transparent and forward thinking and tell you guys what we have going on. So this is not a perfect solution, and we're going to screw it up a few times, right? It's not going to be perfect. But hopefully what everybody can see is just the opportunity here to take the biggest pain point, really minimize it from a client service perspective, and hopefully really drive down maintenance costs, which again goes back to the thesis of the show, which is how do we proactively drive down maintenance and vacancy costs to continue to provide inventory for clients. So you have solved this for me, Melissa. This is incredible.
I don't know. I think another thing to just really consider with this program specifically is when I think about turn expenses, yes, the turn expense itself is expensive and can be overwhelming and just kind of like a shock to the system, because that straight dollar amount's like, oh, wow, okay. But I also think about vacancy and the expense that comes along with not having a resident in your home. And so when you look at my home sitting for a month, 2 months, and I'm not collecting rent, but I'm having to pay those utilities and keep up with the lawn maintenance and all the things that add up. To me, the benefit here is also with the prospect having a quicker time to move in, right? If somebody has to place less money down, they're able to probably move more quickly. And so you're also capturing on the front end a little savings if we can help speed up that days on market number. And so I think if you look at it from that perspective, one of the things that I love most about almost every initiative that we're rolling out is that there really is a win for every party, right? It's not just the client, it's not just the resident. Everyone is going to benefit in some way from this. And that makes me feel really good, because sometimes it's hard when you're like, we're doing this for the good of one party and it's important enough that we're going to do it. But to have some things we're rolling out that really serve everyone, it just feels like we're doing the right thing and making a big difference. So I'm excited. I'm excited about it. I do have tapered expectations, but I'm excited.
Yeah.
Vertically integrated winning. So JWB of you guys.
like that.
I got a couple great questions here in the Q&A. Nadeem Shah asks, how long does it take for the bond to be paid out?
Great question. So once we file a claim, so the end of the lease happens and we notify the resident, hey, you owe whatever physical damages. Let's say that they've caused damages and they owe it. They still owe that money. So while they pay less upfront, it is not an insurance policy for them. That upfront fee they paid doesn't cover them up to the bond amount. So they still have to pay that money back. If they fail to do so within 30 days, we can file a claim and then that money is paid out in a week's time. So from the time we file a claim to us getting those funds and then applying them to the client, you're looking at probably 2-3 weeks. You'd see it before you'd see a traditional security deposit forfeited to you. You would see these funds, if not the same time frame, a little bit sooner than you'd see a traditional deposit. So pretty quick turnaround and no worse off than what you'd see on a traditional deposit. Good question.
Awesome. Margaret Smith has a really good question here. She's asking, is this a product that has been around with good bond companies, or is this a new idea among the old bond companies?
It's a great question. I think it's a new idea with old bond companies. So the company we're working with specifically, they offer a lot of different types of products, and they've entered this space probably within the last 5 years. So there are a handful of companies out there that have been doing this a little bit longer than that. And then a lot of companies that are just picking up on the idea and the concept, because in certain states, and I guess I'd preface this as well, if you're joining us from somewhere else and you don't have properties with us and you're like, hey, I want to do this on my own, this sounds brilliant, check your state laws about what security deposit options you do have, because it does vary state by state. Most states do allow for some sort of deposit alternative, but not all. So luckily, Florida absolutely allows deposit alternatives, which was part of our research on the front end to make sure that we were, going by the book. So yeah, I guess, did that answer the question? I kind of went,
yeah. Yeah, I think it answered the question. It also answered Margaret's follow-up question in the chat, which was, can I do this with my own people? But
Cool.
Yeah, the question was, is this a new idea or is this like an old companies?
Yeah.
But you kind of answered that, right?
Okay.
Like I thought you did pretty good.
A question for you, Melissa. Is it something that maybe a one-off property owner could do, or do you need to achieve a certain number of scale to do something like this?
No, we actually just onboarded a PMC, a client who has homes. They were managing them themselves, and we brought them on board. And they actually had these in place with a different company than the one we're using. But when we got their leases, we were like, oh my goodness, this is what we just rolled out. So a owner who is managing on their own, doing it themselves, can absolutely explore this. Obviously, I just caution you to make sure your state allows you to do it. But yes.
Makes a lot of sense. Ken Moline, Not Your Average Investor Show royalty, asks, is the cost of this bond paid as an upfront cost, or is it a recurring annual payment?
A great question. So you're asking if the fee the resident is paying is ongoing. It is a one-time non-refundable fee. However, at the time of renewal, speaking of renewals again, you do have to renew the bond. And if you renew it, the resident would then place another one-time non-refundable fee at the time of renewal. So they have to pay each time they renew it, but it isn't ongoing on a monthly basis, if that makes sense.
Makes sense to me. Robert Henney asks, is this just for the renter damages, or can all of the $2,500 be fully claimed for typical turnover expenses on each and every move out? Thank you.
Rental damages. So it has to be physical damage the resident caused, or any other penalties in their lease, or any unpaid balances that they leave behind. So let's say a resident moves out and they broke their lease, and so they're charged those lease break penalties. This would cover those instances. And then anything physical damages that we've specifically outlined in our lease agreement. Our lease agreement is a pretty extensive, thorough, detailed agreement. So I do believe it'll capture most items that we typically see on a property turn. But if it's just like a standard wear and tear type of thing, or let's say that there's a tree that fell on your roof, or there's damage to your roof from a storm, we can't claim that portion of it for you. Obviously, the resident didn't cause that to happen. So it has to be something that the resident did cause damage. Good question. That's a very good question. It was one that I asked on the front end when I was trying to understand what would or wouldn't be covered by a claim that got filed. So great question.
And to kind of give maybe the other side of, of this, right? Like there can be property turn costs that go over $2,500. If the bond for this is up to $2,500 and your property turn is higher, which can happen. If it's $4,000, then of course, you should still be expecting that at some point you have expenses to pay when the property turns over. What we expect is that by and large over our entire portfolio, it should be a fraction of what it is today is the hope here.
I'm glad you reclarified that because I was about to go blow my whole. I wasn't going to have any more property expenses in my property.
Martha, we're selling the car. We're getting the property.
I have a wild card question, but I'm going to throw it in. Raja Bantu asked, when the property is vacant, do the property owner need to switch utilities in their name or does JWB handle that?
We handle that for you. We manage your properties. We have what's called a landlord agreement. And so we're able to absorb that utility bill onto our main utility bill, and then you just get billed back for your property's portion. So you'll still see utility expenses on your statement, but you're not having to go through like calling the local utility company and getting it switched. We handle all of those kind of operational components for you.
Totally passive, Raja. What I've learned is that this is half an hour a month for the whole year. So it's, do the math. What is it? Six hours? Anyways, I forgot. What is it? 6 hours a year that you get to own a rental property, right? That's it.
There you go.
I like it.
I like it.
Scott Bellotti, other NYAI royalty.
Wait. How do you pronounce his name, Pablo?
Scott Bellotti. Oh my gosh. Oh man, Scott waited a whole hour to correct me on his name and I'm still messing it up, man. Scott, my bad, buddy. Scott Bellotti asks, what percentage of JWB's portfolio is in the bond process being tested on?
Oh, that's a really good question. So obviously we're only offering it on vacant properties before we've placed a resident. And so you're looking at, we don't have that many homes on the market right now. We have asked a handful of clients who have really large portfolios if they'd be willing to allow their properties to be a part of the program. So we do have there's probably 100 properties right now that would be eligible if their home was vacant, but not every home is vacant. So you're only looking at a handful eligible at a time at the moment. And I think what we're really wanting to make sure of is, again, on the operational side, this also changes a lot for us operationally. There's different documents that have to be signed. The way that it gets documented in our system is different. And so we want to make sure that, again, we are preventing internal errors in the tracking component of this. And then once we have that settled in and we've seen this play out favorably, I'm sure it's going to be something we go in full force and just make accessible, because I do, like Greg's saying, if we can make that significant of an impact on an expense that is historically one of the more painful ones for our client, we absolutely want to do that. So
yeah, and we're going to roll this out slowly. We're going to do it with your experience in mind and the residents' experience in mind. So some of these things are really exciting today, but everybody should just be prepared that most likely your properties, as most of your current clients on the call right now, most likely if you have a property today, the things that we've just discussed here are not going to affect you here today. But just know that as we work through the tweaks and we do it at the right time for the resident to make sure that we continue to have your homes rented and don't cause a huge uproar there, these types of initiatives are coming to you. And hopefully that's really exciting for you. But, a little bit of patience is going to be probably our approach to ask you for as we implement these, because even if we were to roll this out across the entire portfolio right now, it wouldn't do you well, right? Your residents would certainly be in an uproar. And that's our main job here, is to make sure that your passive income continues to come in. So a little bit of patience. We're going to roll it out knowing that your experience and the residents' experience is paramount.
Got it. Last question on this one before we move on to the next one. Marilyn Cotterman from Homosassa, Florida.
Home of the manatees.
Asks, doesn't only putting up $250 upfront feel like less skin in the game to lose should they break their contract and walk away from the rental?
Yes, of course, that is a potential risk. The other piece is that what they're putting down up front is a scale based on their credit. So if a resident has more poor credit, they are going to pay more for that bond. I gave an example trying to use easy numbers, but it's not always going to be that low. It usually still makes more sense than the traditional deposit, or for somebody who may have an increased deposit, obviously it still might make more sense for them, but it's not always that low. To your point, one of the benefits is that once a bond like this is placed, they've put that money down and paid it. The only thing they have left to pay is the first month of rent, which means we can get them moved in much quicker, and we're not sitting there waiting 30 days for them to move into the property, right? Part of the goal here is to speed up the time to move in. And so if they've paid for that bond, the expectation on the front end is now being set differently for them to have a different move-in timeline than maybe somebody else who's paying that traditional deposit that's more money. So we're pretty confident that that sped up move-in timeframe should hopefully prevent people just walking away and saying, oh, well, it's just $250. Who really cares? While you as the client are sitting there like, I just lost a week of time in my home not, being shown. We don't expect to see that be a problem. And obviously our whole team is incentivized to move as quickly as possible for you to get people moved into your home. And I think that's one of the things I look at on our team today and think about. Every person is, how can we get that person moved in more quickly? What can I do to speed up that process? Because we know what that looks like for you as the client. We know how it impacts you. And so our team is going to work really hard to prevent that from happening. I can't say it won't ever happen. Certainly it is a risk, but one I think willing to take in most instances where it should play out, favorably.
And I mean, if you think about how we qualify residents, our standards are really high as it is. This is just an extra qualification, right? And not every resident, if I understand this correctly, not every resident is going to be approved for the bond program.
No.
Right. So,
no.
Our standards haven't changed.
And nothing's changing in our process to qualify them beforehand. So it's not like, oh yeah, just go get the bond and you don't have to meet any of our qualifications. We're still walking them fully through our entire process. This is just the money down to reserve a home, which comes last in our process to make sure that they do qualify and they meet all of our standards that we're looking for. So.
All right. Well, let's move on to one more point so we can get them all in. Flex rent. What is there to be excited about flex rent, Melissa? Tell me.
Flex, all these flex deposit, flex rent. We're flexing left and right.
We are flexing hard on this show right now.
Flex rent, I think, is just super cool. I'm very excited about it on the property management side. And really, the purpose of flex rent is less about reducing any sort of expense. It's not reducing any expense for you, as the client. It is providing a alternative way for residents to pay to ensure that you get your rent payments on time without the hassle internally for our team from an efficiency and a communication standpoint. So basically, flex rent's value proposition is that there is an inherent disconnect between when rent is due and when people get paid, right? Rent is due on the 1st. And if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you get paid every 2 weeks, you might not be able to pay $1,000 on the 1st of every single month, right? And so with that, Flex Rent came up with this idea to be able to provide this alternative payment program for a resident that costs less than it would for them to pay a late fee to us, where they can enroll in their program, also have to have a credit check, and they cannot have an open balance with us. But if they don't have an open balance and their credit is okay, it doesn't have to be great, but just okay, they can agree to pay Flex Rent, their rent for that month. So let's talk April 1st. Flex Rent pays JWB the $1,000 of rent on April 1st. And then that resident can pay Flex Rent back anytime in April. They can pay $200 a week to Flex Rent. They can pay $500 twice to Flex Rent. It doesn't matter. They can pay on any payment schedule. As long as they pay Flex Rent back, they can use it again the next month. And then Flex Rent pays us again on May 1st. And what does this do for, I guess, you first as the client? That means that That's not an eviction that you'll be getting filed that month for somebody who can't make their payments when they're supposed to. That is on-time payment being paid out on your owner draw, and you're not having to be like, oh, they only paid half. What the heck is going on? Right? You're getting that money. However, what's the benefit to the resident? They're able to pay when it works best for them, when they get paid, when it makes sense for them, and they don't have to stress and worry that they're going to get evicted, right? That's a huge win for the resident to not have that burden of stress on their plate. And then the last piece, and I guess the least important, but still what I'm excited about, is internally, if we're getting rent paid on time like that, that eliminates a lot of calls and conversations for our team, which creates efficiency, time savings, our ability to serve you better because we have more time to do it and we're not hounding people for the rent that they owe. And so the beauty of this is there's really no downside for anyone because the resident pays flex rent, a nominal fee. I think it's $20 a month to be enrolled in this program. Our late fee internally is more than $20. So they'd rather do that than pay us a late fee to be able to pay late. And there's no lost money or effort or anything for the client. You're still going to get that rent collected for you and you're going to see it on your draw. So it's really an amazing, amazing sell for the resident to have this as a resource and for us to get that money collected for you sooner. Obviously with COVID and rent collection, we've talked, I know Greg talks about this all the time on the show, giving you guys updates on how things are going. And we didn't suffer, right? We still really performed through COVID. We really continued to collect rent, but anything we can do to more quickly get ourselves back to a very normal pre-COVID course of business when it comes to that is going to be wonderful. So I think this will help that along quite a bit. And I know my team's really excited because rent calls, right? I don't know, anybody out there made some rent calls? They're not the easiest calls to make. They're not fun. So
across a portfolio of 3,700 homes, by the way.
Exactly.
Right?
Hundreds of calls, hundreds and hundreds of calls a month. So yeah, it should be exciting to see that play out as well. We're looking forward to seeing how it gets adopted and how it affects you in a positive way.
When I think about this program, I think there's just an immediate win for the resident right up front, right? You know, especially as residents who get paid throughout the month. I mean, late fees are $150 if you pay after the third, on the third or after a JWB. So for that resident to be able to pay on their schedule, to work within their current job and expense structure, to be able to plan this out is a huge win for them. I think about it being a win for JWB, you know, to be able to be more efficient, to be able to run your business better, to run our business better. And this is really what you need to see from your partners out there. Again, as this environment, this space is a space where margins are decreasing, right? You need to be looking for partners who are figuring out better ways to do this. So this is a value for JWB. But if you think about what the value for you as a client is, it's kind of like a circular approach here, right? If we can free up more time and resources to be able to do other things for your benefit, we can think of more ideas like the septic warranty, right? And like flex deposit, which have a huge reduction, hopefully, on your maintenance and vacancy costs. So I think it's a win across the board. I mean, these three initiatives, I haven't been as excited about anything we've rolled out in such a short time period. You guys have a marketing mind over there because you're like, I'm going to roll out all three like within the span of a month, just create like a big to do there. So I'm excited about it. I really, really am.
So I'm hearing happier residents, and I'm hearing, are people at JWB actually going to be even happier than they already are when you talk to them on the phone because they don't have to make rent calls?
Yes.
I'm looking forward to see how that goes. That's going to be a little bit intimidating. So much happiness. Got a couple questions. Margaret Smith asks, how else do you make rent payments easier? For instance, can a tenant set up a Zelle payment?
That's a really good question. They can't, not Zelle specifically. We're actually in the middle of a huge transition into a new software system. So actually my team, yesterday was their first day in this new system. And so we're just spinning our wheels and going crazy. But a lot of what we did when we created that was to make rent payments more efficient, more cost effective for the resident as far as what fees they have to pay and things like that. So we really did try to create a better experience for the resident through this transition, which I'm excited to kind of see once we're through these initial hurdles of just what it is to mass transition 3,800 properties into a new payment portal and all of those things. I am excited to see how that impacts the resident. You know, the fees structures for things like that are really tricky, and you have to do a lot of research at the level that we'd be processing payments. What makes most sense and how can we keep that fee structure really low for the resident? But certainly we're trying to continually think of creative ways to make sure that we're benefiting them, all the while still really serving you as the client and making sure it works within our internal processes for our staff as well. So
I know some of the things that you guys are working on, and we won't spill the beans now, but I think that we have ourselves set up for the next show that Melissa joins us on, next quarter or in 2 quarters or whenever we're ready. We've got all those things buttoned up and released, because I know there are some really, really cool things that we're working on right now that we're just not really at a point right now where we can share, because we're not 100% certain it's ready to go full time. So we're working on it for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what we in the event production biz call a teaser, folks. A teaser. We got one more question about Flex Rent from Mike Foster. If Flex Rent only charges $20 a month, how do they handle a loss of, say, $1,200 if the resident doesn't pay them anything in a month?
Really good question. So luckily that's on Flex Rent to figure out. It never comes back to us. They never pull funds back from us. What they do is they don't allow a resident to utilize that program any further until that money is recaptured by them. And so for a resident, there's a lot of incentive to make sure it gets paid, because if they don't get to use it again. And then next month they're getting an eviction, right? Like it's going to catch up with them at some point if they don't make good choices. I feel like I sound like a parent. Make good choices, but it's very real, right? Obviously, we can't control the residents' choices, but if we provide them the option and they utilize it properly, Flex Rent wins. Flex Rent will continue to try to collect those balances until they're recaptured. So really the resident's the one who loses out. Obviously, I'm sure Flex Rent has something in place that makes it worth it for them to be able to take that risk, run that gamble, I guess.
Yeah, sounds like another level of like passiveness. It's like kind of not your problem now that you got Flex Rent, right?
I don't want to say it like that. That's
why I say it. Yeah.
They're the ones who figured out. Brilliant. I thought about it myself. I'm like, how did I not think of this? I should have thought of this. This is such a good idea, but I didn't. So Flex Rent has to figure it out.
There you go. So we got like a million questions left to hear in the Q&A. The beauty of the Q&A is that the team gets this, so they'll reach out to you with answers. We only got about 4 minutes left, Melissa. I know that you got a whole software transition to handle. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about this day of innovation at JWB where you came up with all of these awesome ideas? I've been dying to hear about this one.
I will tell you, I think the coolest thing is every year at JWB, we kind of set an intention for the year. And I know that I do this in my personal life. A lot of people do this in their personal life, where maybe they choose a word for the year or whatever. And so we do that at JWB. And we really rally the team around a focus in some way. And so in 2020, it was efficiency. We were really working to figure out the efficiency of all of our processes, our workflows, and making sure we were working smarter, not harder. And so when it comes to maintenance expense specifically, we got the quality and efficiency piece down pretty well in 2020. We made some amazing changes. Our teams are firing on all cylinders. And so for 2021, the next step is incremental gains was the kind of intention for the year for the entire business. And when you look at that from a maintenance expense percentage, it's incremental gains in reducing expenses. And so one of the things we said at the very beginning of the year is how do we make significant gains in a company of 80 people with thousands of properties we manage? Sometimes you work slower and you implement slower when there's that many people that you're trying to get all on the same page. And so we were like, how do we do this quickly? How do we come up with implementations quickly? And so myself and Jim Marshall, our director of construction, set up a mastermind session for 3 of our largest teams to carve out about 90 minutes of time to put our heads together, brainstorm, and really come up with the out of the box ideas that maybe are like, I just don't even know if I should share that. That's probably a dumb idea, or that will never get implemented. So I'm just going to keep it to myself, right? And we said, there is no boundary to what you can share. Anything that comes to your mind, share it. And so we ended up with roughly 100 new ideas. Some of them are very far out of the box and probably won't be used, some, but a lot of them were really wonderful. And so we took all of those ideas and we said, okay, where are there some duplicate ideas and where are there ones that we can immediately implement? And we said, all right, let's pick the top 20 that are able to be immediately implemented. And we did that. And so I think for me, obviously not getting into what all of those ideas were, because we don't have time, it was a really wonderful moment in time for me to look at 3 teams who sometimes have conflicting opinions about things, right? We all have what we bring to the table and what our departments are immediately responsible for. And sometimes those things feel like they are rubbing, or there's friction and there's tension, because sometimes it doesn't feel like it's perfectly aligned. And in this moment in time, we all were there for the same purpose, perfectly aligned, collaborating together, listening to each other. It was a moment that felt so collaborative for me. And I was just like, yes, we're getting it. People are bought in, they're excited about it. They're believing in the why behind what we're doing. And it was just really wonderful. So outside of being a very valuable use of time practically, where we did come up with great ideas and we've implemented 20 of them already in the first less than 3 months of the year, I think it started the year off on a really great foot for us to be on the same page and to work together and to trust each other and support each other. It was really warm and fuzzy. I don't know. It felt good. Felt really good.
Man, if I can just fanboy right now, right? Like I know that I really wanted to bring this up, and Greg's like, people don't care about this. I care about this, right? So I'm gonna fanboy it real quick.
I know you, Greg. What are you doing shutting it down?
Hey, don't throw me under the bus like that, Pablo.
Well, listen, man, you are of a service mentality, right? Like you're like, the audience isn't going to care so much about this, about the other stuff. Let's make sure we hit on the points that they showed up here for. And I completely agree, right? Not throwing you under the bus. I'm just being selfish here. Like so when Melissa told me about this a couple of weeks ago when we talked, I had just finished reading Creativity Inc., which is the story about Pixar. And Pixar famously does this, right? Like they have a whole day where they shut the doors, they bring everybody in to ideate, to come up with ideas, exactly how you described. They create these like safes, like it's safe to say anything. You can bring up anything, no judgments, right? Nothing's too stupid, nothing's too crazy. And they do this. And like the idea that JWB is operating on a Pixar level, right? And that you, Melissa, and your team and what you're doing gets this exposure to this just like high level, like Silicon Valley style management strategy. I just think it's unbelievable. Like I really wanted to just talk about it because I think it's extraordinary. And like you said, giving people ownership of the ideas, allowing people to fail forward, allowing the innovation to come from the user level instead of from some ivory tower. It's just like all the things that you want to hear in business that people often lament that doesn't exist. And I just think it's fascinating.
And I think clients really do, I think they do really, this is people working for you, spending time being efficient and collaborative, working for you. And so if you think about it, when people are on the same page in a business and they are working together, the product, the output is so much better than if you have division and frustration and people who are not. And so I think to me, it was just a beautiful moment of like, we are all aligned working to produce for you. And so it was just, I don't know. I think it's amazing. I
think it's amazing too, for the record, just so you know.
Okay, good.
Pablo, he's throwing me under the bus there. I definitely think it's amazing.
You know what, Greg, before this call, you were just talking about when am I ever going to talk poorly about you? There you go, pal. You finally got one.
I was just going to say, man, Pablo's coming in strong here at the end. Boom. Oh,
Boom.
man.
Listen, speaking of amazing, Melissa, you are amazing. You are an
Oh, thanks.
unbelievable guest here. You're such
Oh.
value. Like you're like the chat has been lighting up. Lighting up, if I could just, if I could scroll up
Oh.
here, Marilyn writes, she exemplifies such positive enthusiasm that pulls you into her world. Margaret put something, Melissa, you saved the best for last. Well done. Your spirit and intelligence just shine here. And I, for one, am so
Oh.
appreciative. There's a bunch of love. Lee Bishop, I love the smiling face of Melissa as she answers these questions, right? Like you over deliver every single time that you've been here so far. You are always welcome back here. It's such a joy to have you here. Like the way that you answer this stuff, like I tell people that this is why I want more teammates from JWB to come on the show, because of all the talent that's in that business, and you're an unbelievable ambassador of all of that. So thank you so much for being here, for real.
I'm feeling good. I have a lot of work to go back and do, so I'm going with a full heart, and I feel really good. Thank you so much for all those kind things. That means a lot to me. It was so fun being here. I love it.
Awesome. And listen, everybody, if you're not in our Facebook group, join the Facebook group, jwbfacebookgroup.com. If you don't have the ROI tool, grab the ROI tool, jwbroi.com. Join us on Thursday for the Not Your Average Investor Show, JWB Rental Income Property of the Week.
Week.
Where Greg and I actually break down the nuts and bolts of an individual investment and give you like the whole perspective on everything. And you'll get to ask questions, and it's even more interactive than today. I know that we left a lot of questions open in the chat, in the Q&A, but that's why we encourage you to use the Q&A, because the team is able to download the Q&A and reach back out to you. So expect to hear from our team if you haven't had your question answered. Talking to you, Mark Meisberger, I think your questions will definitely be answered by the team. And it's an honor to be a part of this, Greg. I'm going to leave it up to you, buddy.
Yeah, Mel, you are an absolute rock star. Thank you so much for being here. I went into this show like super excited to share these initiatives. And as I'm sitting here at the end of the show and just seeing the presence that you are, and just the experience and just the kind of the personality that you bring to this, and I know people are seeing that you are not just a property manager, right? JWB is not just a property management company. When you get to work with us, when you get to invest with us, you get high level talent here that is so far different than being just a property manager. Mel, that's what you are. You're so much more than that. I appreciate you being here, sharing your knowledge, your experience, and just being such a positive influence on the show. And we're going to keep the seat warm for you. You're coming back, whether you like it or not.
All right. Sounds like a deal. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys.